What is up, everyone? We are back with some honorable mentions for the murders at Karlov Manor. We got some pretty sick decks here, even though they didn't make the top 5. So let's check it out. Alrighty, so starting off, we have a blue-white deck. I'm going to go a little bit fast because we got a lot of these to go through, so keep that in mind, but you'll see all the deck lists in the description, so you can check them out there. But the first one we got is what I like to call a good old honest blue-white control deck, and so it's got basically everything you would expect. You know, you've got your win cons here, your big guys, some planeswalkers, you got some sweepers. You've got, of course, an array of counterspells and draw cards, and then artifacts, and one spicy one of enchantment here as well. And then, of course, we have to have at least 26 lands. Sometimes you can go 27, but 26 is kind of the minimum for a typical control list. So yeah, so let's dive into it a little bit more. Basically, the new cards we got are Ezram, Agency Chief. So it's a 5-mana Archon Detective, which is a 5/5 with flying. It comes into the battlefield and you investigate twice, so you'll get 2 clue tokens, which you can use to draw cards. But also you can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact, and this will get Vigilance, Lifelink, or Hexproof until end of turn. So we have a few other ways in the deck to get some artifacts. First of all, Sunfall. When you sweep the board, it makes an artifact token, so you can use that with your Ezram if you need to. We also have Celestis and Ironcrag here, both of which are artifacts, which we can use for Ezram. So there's that. There's also Mirrex here, which makes some artifacts if you have the mana to pump into it. Restless Anchorage, same thing. It's going to make a map token, so that's an artifact. So we have a few ways, not a ton, but a few ways to get some artifacts down before we drop the Ezram. So if you're patient enough, which is sometimes hard, I know, but if you're patient enough, you can get an artifact down, drop this on turn 6, and then hold up the hexproof, prevent anyone from killing it. Or if your opponent taps out, then you can do the same thing anyway. And the new other cards we got, Intrude on the Mind, 5 mana for, you know, decent card draw with also creates kind of a win con there for you, a flying artifact, Thopter. It is an artifact if we need to use that. And I think the card is good. You're gonna have to be very smart because the opponent gets to pick the pile, which is something I did see other people mentioning. So, you know, if there's something you really want, you put it in the one pile and put 4 in the other one so that the opponent will either give you what you really want or give you 4 other cards. You know, you're not always going to get exactly what you want. So maybe you want to try to split up like one card you want here, one card you want here. And so the opponent doesn't really have a good choice of what they can pick. So anyway, you'll have to be smart, see how it works. Worst case, you get a big Thopter creature. So I guess you could even put 0 in one pile and 5 in the other. And they're going to give you 0 and you'll just get a Thopter if that's what you want. I don't know. Maybe sometimes you would do that. But that's kind of the other new additions. We got No Witnesses as well. 4 mana sweeper. It's going to give the opponent a clue token, but against certain aggro decks, you really do want a 4 mana sweeper. Right now we do have Depopulate in standard, which is good against any mono colored deck. So it's good against like white humans, good against mono red. But against Esper or Domain or soldiers or the Boros deck, Depopulate gets a lot worse. And so I think No Witnesses might just be better, giving them a clue that takes a while for them to recuperate their losses is probably, you know, okay. As long as you get like 3 or so creatures, you're gonna be pretty happy with that trade. So we got that going on, and of course, can't forget No More Lies. Really good counterspell. Mana leak on steroids, and that's in standard. So yeah, that's another reason to play blue-white control. So blue-white gets a pretty good upgrade. We also have Profs here, which synergizes with some of our card draw to pump up our creatures. You could pump up your tokens from the Emperor, your Ezram, or your Lock Whale. or even your Thopter here. So there is some ways to get it to benefit you, and of course, no maximum hand size is nice, though probably that won't come up super often. All right, that is it for that. So that's the upgrades for blue-white control. We also see some upgrades for mono blue, in my opinion, at least. So this is mostly a stock list. So I added Ingenious Prodigy because I mean, it may never become a thing, but I think Prof's Eidetic Memory and Ingenious Prodigy, the synergy is really, really good there. It's one of the only ways in blue to put counters on creatures. The other ways are Essence Capture, which is good in mono blue, and of course Slip Out the Back also. So the biggest issue with mono blue is sometimes you can run out of cards, right? Well, there's a couple issues. I guess you could lose to aggro and you could run out of cards. So I think the fact that you can keep pumping up Ingenious Prodigy and in turn get a bunch of cards from that and do unblockable damage makes it pretty scary. But it may turn out that it's just not worth it, and we'll have to see. But worst case, you can pump up your Haughty Djinn or your Terror or things like that. So there's a lot going on for this Prof's Eidetic Memory in the mono blue deck. And that's the main upgrade, to be honest, is Prof's Eidetic Memory. I think for sure this goes in mono blue. So I just don't know if this one also does. And then right now, mono blue typically plays Flow of Knowledge, which in most games I play against mono blue, if it resolves, it draws about 7 cards. And then they discard 2. I would say 5 to 7 cards in most games that I'm playing. So that is like a pretty sweet combo there with Prof's Eidetic Memory, which probably means this one is better because we could swap it out with Intrude on the Mind if we want like more win cons and more ways to fill the graveyard, because it does fill the graveyard, which would help your Haughty Djinn and your Terror. So there is that benefit of here, but so does Flow of Knowledge. You discard 2 cards that can fill the graveyard. So both make sense in the deck. I don't think you want both of them. So I think probably we're going to be adding this Profs and stick to Flow of Knowledge. Flow of Knowledge in this deck. That would be my guess. So mono blue definitely gets some upgrades. I also think you probably want some number of copies of the Surveil land because like you don't want it late game, but if you have it in your opening hand, well, super late game is fine. I guess you just don't want it in the mid game, but early game, turn 1, it'd be nice to put this down and surveil one of the spells into your graveyard. So you already got your Haughty Djinn and your Terror starting going. And then late game, it would help fix your selection. So that's also nice. So I think makes sense to put some number of them in this deck. I just don't know what the right number is. So anyway, those are 2 decks that are getting improvements from this new set. I'm sure mono red also has some, but I'm not the person to go to for the mono red deck. So now I want to look at some new decks that I came up with. The next one is blue black reenact control. So we got a sweet new card, reenact the crime scene, or reenact the crime, I guess it is. And in itself, this card is a little bit tricky, but if you build your deck around it, you can really make it work. And I think this one at least has the makings of something great. And this may not be the version, but I can almost guarantee you like Andre Strasky or someone like that is going to come up with some way to break this card. So yeah, stay tuned. Maybe you just do Atraxa, like Atraxa works, right? But we'll see. So what are you doing in the deck? Well, basically you've got early game looter creatures like Likeness Looter, Rona, and Vohar, which can let you draw a discard at instant speed. And it doesn't cost, like you can play the creature on one turn, and then the next turn do your reenact the crime basically for 4 mana, because you didn't have to invest anything to discard. And one of the conditions on reenact the crime is that you can only cast a spell or non-land permanent that was put into the graveyard this turn. So you really need to wait to discard it immediately and then cast the spell. So that said, so that's the game plan. Get something down that can discard for cheaply, or a spell like Consider or Bitter Triumph. And then, what are we discarding? We're discarding Breach the Multiverse. We're discarding Conspiracy Unraveler. We're discarding Bringer of the Last Gift, Cityscape Leveler, and Hoarding Broodlord. So we want to discard all these really big things. And then probably the things that you want to cast with your Reenact is Bringer of the Last Gift, which this is a crazy card. So no one's been able to figure out how to make this work. And I think this is the deck for that, because it says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. And then each player returns all creatures from the graveyard that weren't put there or put into the battlefield that way. So essentially, you don't want to kill the opponent's creatures early game as much as possible. Of course, sometimes you have to slow down the game a little bit. But if you can get your turn 2 Looter, your turn 4 Reenact, and play Bringer, potentially, you know, you might have like 1 or 2 other big creatures in your graveyard, and they're going to have none because they don't have a way to mill, they don't have a way to discard, and you didn't kill anything. So you're going to cast this from your graveyard, you're going to kill everything on the board, and then you're going to get back some giant creature, which is very sweet. And even if, worst case, you have nothing in your graveyard, and they have nothing in your graveyard, you just wiped their board, and you've got a 6/6, so it's still not that bad. Of course, other things you can do, which are pretty nice, Breach the Multiverse, and you'll want to find things like your Hoarding Broodlord, your Cityscape Leveler, or your Conspiracy Unraveler. This is a really sick combo here too, because if you breach into the Unraveler, more than likely you're going to have 10 evidence in your graveyard to immediately cast something from your hand. So if you have a Bringer in your hand or Hoarding Broodlord or something, then you might be able to cast it right away, or even your Virtue of Persistence. So very, like, lots of synergy going on here. Like things, spells leading into other spells. Feels a lot of Thrones of Eldraine standard, where like you had really chain reaction effects going on that just win you the game immediately. So I think this has some really sick potential to do stuff like that. Lastly, I put in this Hoarding Broodlord because it has a pretty good enter the battlefield effect, because it can find you a card from your deck. So you could potentially find your Reenact the Crime, and then in some cases, probably not that likely, but you might be able to immediately cast it again, because it lets you cast for Convoke. So if you had like a Celestis and 2 other creatures, then potentially you could immediately cast it again. I don't really see that happening, but at least you'll have another one in exile, so you can cast it on another turn if you want to. Or if you've got 7 mana, you can find your Breach of the Multiverse. That's also pretty sweet. So overall, it lets you find the next play, so you can continue this. Sorry about that. So you can continue this like chain reaction kind of thing. So seems very sweet. If I hadn't quite finished the whole concept by the time I did the top 5, so this might have made it on the top 5 if I had figured everything out back then, but I still think it's a very cool deck, so that's why it's here. All right, next up, blue-black Assassin midrange. This is basically the blue-black deck that's in standard, but we switch out a little bit to give you some assassins. So we've got Aven Heartstabber, a good card, which didn't quite make it because it's a 1/1 in a lot of cases. But now that we've got Spyglass, now that we've got Malcolm, and now that we've got Invasion of Amonkhet, things like that, we do have ways to fill the graveyard. Plus, the opponent's going to want to kill your stuff. So potentially you could get 5 or more mana values and trigger that. But more importantly, it's a flying assassin. So you play this on turn 2, turn 3, Etrata, you swing in, and you could potentially get a free card if the opponent can't block you or kill your creature. So that is kind of a sweet combo that the opponent's not going to see coming. Of course, we still got the normal stuff like Gix and Invasion, Tishana's Tidebinder, Etrata, Sheoldred, Akalazots, and yeah, a lot of the usual things, the Schooner, etc. So I put in a couple other new cards as well. Massacre Girl, she's also an assassin, and she's got a very nice effect which draws you cards. So that seems pretty good. You can essentially get the trigger from Etrata because they don't want to block you anymore, because then you'll get the wither effect and get a card. And then Course to Kill is another one that turns something into, you steal a creature from the opponent, it becomes a 1/1 assassin with Death Touch. So more than likely they're going to just take the hit and let their creature die because they don't want to let you get the card from Etrata. But either way, it's always going to be a 2-for-1 because you steal the creature and then they have to invest resources to kill their own creature. So these kind of effects typically have been very good as long as they're not unreasonably cost. So I think this one is pretty reasonably cost. We had a 4-mana one before that forced you to sack a creature, which was really good for a while. But in current standard, sacking a creature is just like a little bit too much unless your deck specifically gets payoffs for sacking. So I think this one is a little bit better than that. Anyway, that is the main thing for this deck. Not a whole lot of other changes. Of course, we can add the new Surveil lands if we want to, but the key part of this is that we're adding the Assassin package in here. Right, and then the last one, this is probably the one I haven't figured out quite enough yet. So take it with a grain of salt, but the main idea is there, which is this new Case of the Gorgon's Kiss. I think this card is really bonkers, but it just needs to find how to be broken. So 1 black, when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target creature that was dealt damage this turn. That part's not that great. We don't care. We're just going to play this as a 1-mana enchantment. And then to solve it, 3 or more creatures were put into the graveyard from anywhere this turn. So to solve this, we have 2 ways. 1, we sweep the board with either no witnesses or deadly cover up. And we can't use exile effects because they won't go into the graveyard, right? So we have to use real sweepers. And then the other way, if we breach the multiverse and we mill 3 creatures in any graveyard, then this will flip. So essentially, you want to put this down on turn 1, maybe turn 2, maybe turn 3, and then let the opponent build up a board. You sweep the board, and now you've got a bunch of 4/4s with lifelink and Death Touch. So pretty, yeah, 1 mana for a 4/4 with lifelink Death Touch is pretty sweet, and this deck can enable it like really easily, so it just seems like a slam dunk. And yeah, I don't know the right shell yet. Like I said, it could be in blue-black that you want to do, it could be in black-white, it could be in Esper, but some way with this Kiss, Case, and Sweepers and Breach seems like it just makes a ton of sense. And as far as our creatures, I put in Underdog in here because it's a good blocker early game. It's got value late game. You don't care if it gets destroyed in a sweeper. You could get it from your graveyard later. So it makes sense to go in a deck with a lot of sweepers. And the rest of the deck, I have to be honest, I don't have it fully fleshed out. We got removal. We got some pseudo draw here with Outrageous Robbery. And then a lot of planeswalkers, which can slow down the game. That's kind of what I was thinking, just to slow down the game, give you some win cons. And then, of course, your Breach the Multiverse can hit any of these big things. So that's essentially what you want to find, is one of those big creatures. Yeah, I think that's about it. The Gorgon's Kiss, I think the life gain on here is like pretty key. The fact that it comes down turn 1 means you don't have to like waste your turn 2. So you put this on turn 1, and then you can still remove a creature turn 2 with some removal card. So it just seems like there's some deck here. I will find it eventually, or somebody will beat me to it, but there's definitely something good about this card, and doing this with sweepers is definitely something that's gonna work. But anyway, that is all the honorable mentions for now. And I'm pretty excited about the new set. I hope some of the new decks will shake things up, but I'm not going to put my money on it because I know Domain will never die, unfortunately, and the aggro decks will never die in best of 1. So yeah, we'll see. But I am excited that maybe Control will be good, especially this blue-white one, or maybe the Bant one that I showed earlier. Both of them seem pretty good to me. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope you have fun on the release day. Until next time, see ya.